The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our spring webinar series. Today, we're going to be talking about a case study, which is EAB Management from a Municipal Perspective. Before we delve into things, just wanted to really talk about our commitment to education during COVID-19. During this unprecedented time, we know that you've been making adjustments to your organization, and our commitment is to continue to support you with plant healthcare science and education that will help your organization grow. This is just one of many webinars that we're going to be doing for our spring webinar series. The next one is going to be happening on April 23rd from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. This one's going to be on California pest management, talking about the polyphagus shot-hole borer as well as the gold-spotted oak borer. But with this, if you would like additional virtual training on this or any other PHC topic, please feel free to schedule time with your territory manager or arborologist. Otherwise, you can find additional information by contacting us via email at info@treecarescience.com. So today's guest presenter is Jeff Haberman, who is a city forester of Rochester, Minnesota. And he has worked as a city forester for Rochester since 2014. He's been an ISA certified arborist since 2003 and has worked in a municipal setting since that time. He also maintains municipal specialist certification and has been track qualified since 2014. He really enjoys work, but when he is not able to do that, he enjoys kayaking, disc golf, and managing 45 acres of land where he lives. And some just simple housekeeping items. For all of those that are attending remotely, just make sure to do a safety assessment around you. Just want to make sure that everyone is safe during this time. Additionally, for the Q&A process, feel free to enter in any sort of questions in that question box that you can see in the lower right-hand corner on the screen. And at the end of the presentation, we'll go ahead and read questions off, and Jeff will be able to answer those for you. This webinar is also being recorded, and the video link will be emailed out at the conclusion of that. And additionally, lastly, the CEU process will be covered at the end of this webinar as well. So, without further ado, I'll go ahead and pass this along to Jeff and let him get started.
All right. Thank you, Eric. Assuming you can see my screen. Thank you all for joining, and I hope today finds you safe and well. Today I'm going to talk about EAB management, share Rochester's story. Rochester has a population of 114,000 and growing rapidly. In 2018, we did an iTree assessment, collected 6,000 points, and arrived at a canopy cover of about 25.5%. And previous to that, we had a random inventory of all trees in the city, including private land, done by the University of Minnesota, which determined that ash comprised about 13% of our urban forest on both private and public land. So first I'm going to talk about the EAB timeline here. It was discovered in 2015, and it was not discovered within city limits, but just outside of city limits. And the picture that I have on this screen is showing the wholesale tree loss that we were experiencing even in 2017, and of course it's gotten worse. The original discovery was in the southwest part of Rochester, where this picture was taken, and we'll consider ourselves in year 5 of our infestation this year. So in 2016, we quickly moved to develop a EAB management plan, and Rainbow Tree Care assisted in the creation of that plan. But prior to that plan, ordinance revisions had already been made to include EAB in our nuisance tree ordinance. And I say that because I think that's important for everyone to consider if you haven't done so already. We did end up making other changes to our ordinance, which I'll talk about throughout my presentation. But one of the main things we did is we included or defined the area where we are managing our nuisance tree ordinance. And essentially, it applies on all developed parcels throughout our city and a 100-foot buffer of all developed parcels. And just for clarification, so in a natural area, we're only going to be looking at the first 100 feet bordering any developed parcel. Anything beyond that distance would not be regulated by our ordinance. Now I'm going to go through some of the highlights of the management plan. First of all, we offered several scenarios to be presented to council for consideration regarding our EAB management plan. And the options had varying levels of chemical treatments included in them. Ultimately, the plan that included the most treatments ended up being the cheapest and became an easy sell simply from a financial standpoint. But some of the other options that we offered were a base case of doing nothing, simply removing all of the trees and replacing them. A second option included the treatment of 1,200 trees, and all of those trees would be treated for the entire 20-year time frame of our plan. This ended up being somewhat cheaper in the first 10 years of the plan, but less cost savings over the whole 20 years. Well, then we offered an option where we would treat 2,500 trees. Half of them would be treated for the entire 20 years and half would be treated for 10 years before they'd be allowed to succumb. This was quite a bit cheaper in the first 10 years because it flattened the cost during the peak period of infestation, but not much cheaper over the entire plan because you're still doing all of the removals that the first plan included, and you have the added cost of the treatments to keep half of the trees alive. And then the final option would be to treat all 2,500 trees for the entire 20 years. We arrived at choosing the middle option, so we're treating the 2,500 trees, half of them for 10 years, half of them for 20 years, with the caveat that after the first 10 years is up, that we'll review how the management is going, and we could decide at that time to continue those treatments. The plan includes a 20-year time frame with the assumption that most of the work will be contracted, with the exception of doing the inspections and also chemical injections. And while we had to try, contracting all the work soon became difficult with limitations in our budget that were imposed, and I'll explain that in more detail a little later in my presentation. But the management plan goals included detection and suppression of the infestation, preserving structurally sound ash trees, improving species diversity, postponing and decreasing peak ash mortality, minimizing public costs, and managing tree debris and encouraging private ash tree owners to treat their trees. Of course, preserving ash trees means preservation of benefits, and medium and high quality ash trees are the ones that we plan to treat. That's what we're basing our treatment selection on. Other reasons we may consider treatment would be trees where significant loss of benefits will occur. For instance, in our central business district and our core downtown areas, very difficult to get trees to grow to substantial sizes there. So those trees became important for us to consider preserving. And then also trees that will help avoid high removal costs. So that's kind of what guided our treatment program. I have information on how EAB management impacted our staffing hours a little later, but I do want to mention that our plan including adding 3 arborists to our staff, which at the time was 5, and currently we've added 2 positions and work with 7 arborists on our staff now. That was critical. Unfortunately, the third seems to be falling off the radar of our priority list, and I hope that I can change that in the near future. Currently, our 2019 ash population is about 6,000. That's what we have in our inventory. About 4,400 of those reside on streets and in parks, and then an additional 1,600 in natural areas and within 100 feet of a developed parcel, trail, parkland, or private property. So I'm going to go through the various elements of our EAB management efforts. And of course, everything starts with our inspection process. Inspections ideally are carried out annually in March. March is when woodpecker activity is the highest, and it's the most easily visible, even with the naked eye. However, we also have a goal to carry out all of our EAB work during the non-flight season. And it didn't take us long to realize that inspections had to begin much sooner than March if we were going to get the inspections done and carry out all the work, the ensuing work that we created for ourselves. So now we'll start as early as December 1st, sometimes even sooner on our public inspections. And basically, once we confirm a tree, it either it'll get put on our treatment list if it's scheduled for treatment, and if it's not scheduled for treatment, it'll get marked for removal. So that's kind of the goal, is we use our inspections to help us make the decision on where we're treating trees, and then of course populate our removal lists. In 2017, a research paper came out, which I've indicated here, and it's in volume 24 of Urban Forestry and Urban Greening. And it was titled "The Strategic Removal of Host Trees and Isolated Satellite Infestations of Emerald Ash Borer Can Reduce Population Growth." Essentially, it indicated that removal of woodpeck trees, even before you can confirm that they had EAB, can reduce EAB populations and growth. So it was just another tool that we could use to help reduce pest populations and aid in our slowing ash mortality goals. So woodpeck trees are treated as infested, and when we detect a woodpeck tree, it's either scheduled for treatment that year or it's removed as if it was confirmed with EAB. And we definitely erred on the side of caution when we implemented this strategy in our first year of removing woodpeck trees. So I asked staff to confirm that each tree had EAB, which they did. 100% of every one of the woodpeck trees they confirmed was infested. And again, as I say, this information that we gather in these annual inspections is critical to our management strategies. So one way that we use that information is to develop our treatment list. We learned very early on that pre-defining the list of trees, so we knew we had this set of 2,500 trees that we were going to treat, and before we really got into it, we thought, okay, we're going to treat, the trees around downtown first, and then we're going to do this area and that area, because we treat about 500 trees a year. Well, we learned very early that pre-defining the list would risk losing trees that were on that list. And so because our management plan calls for treating the best half of our ash population, that included 3,000 of our best conditioned trees, we basically we would start our treatment list each year with those that were on the treatment list that were either woodpecker confirmed, and then if we had extra room, in that 500 trees, that was our goal each year, then we'd pick strategic locations to treat trees so that they could serve as trap trees to help suppress the population. As I mentioned, of those 3,000 trees, 1,100 of those trees will be treated for 10 years. We call this staging for removal. So we're basically keeping these trees alive for a period of time to flatten that peak of tree mortality and allow us to plan the removals. The other 1,900 of the 3,000 that we are treating are going to be treated for the 20-year time frame of the plan. And I truly believe that we're going to be able to push the needle and end up treating the remainder of those 3,000 trees for the whole 20-year time frame, simply to help save costs. But I'll talk about that more a little bit later. Treatments are performed in teams of 2 people. That way one can work ahead of the arborist that's injecting, preparing the next tree, getting the holes drilled. This especially works well if you have multiple trees on a block. And since they're not always right next to each other, like in the photo I have here, 2 people allows for one to monitor the tree that's set up and in taking up the chemical, while the arborist moves to the other tree and installs the system and begins getting the chemical applied to that tree. In 2016, we began our injection program, and we were applying at the high application rate of 10 mils per inch. When I say 10 mils, we use emamectin benzoate. But in 2019, we changed and we began applying at the medium rate of emamectin benzoate, which is 5 mils per inch. And our treatments are done on a 3-year treatment cycle. We made the decision to change from the high rate to the medium rate based on the publication that I have listed here, which is an excellent review of EAB chemical efficacy. And it suggests that it even may be possible to drop your application rate to the low application rate and still stay on a 3-year cycle without losing any trees. So I highly recommend, if you haven't seen that article, to check it out. It's called Insecticide Options for Protecting Ash Trees from Emerald Ash Borer. It's a 3rd edition by Herms, McCullough, Smitley, Sadoff, Miller, and Crenshaw. And you can Google that and find it easily. And then in addition, we are also offered an opportunity to be part of a community immunity research study done by the University of Minnesota. And the goal of this study is to study the effects of trees that treated trees have on protecting non-treated trees. So they were looking for 13 different sites throughout the state of Minnesota, and they wanted an area that had a minimum of 200 ash trees. They preferred a monoculture, and then they treated half of the trees randomly through 2 treatment cycles on a 2-year cycle as per the label. And in this study, the last treatment here in Rochester occurred last year. And so to date, we have only lost 2 trees in that neighborhood of 200 ash trees where 50% of the trees have been injected. So, you know, people ask, are treatments worth considering? Decision makers want to know that. Well, I say absolutely. Even at the high application rate of 10 mils per inch, our treatment costs when we did it in-house were about $8.75 per inch. So on a 20-inch tree, that's going to cost $175 to inject it. Since we're on a 3-year cycle for injections, that brings it to about $58 a year. And you can see from the National Tree Benefit Calculator, when you entered our zip code, a tree of that size is returning approximately $179 in benefit annually. But the cost savings even get better when you consider applying at the medium rate of 5 mils per inch. Now we can treat at a cost of $6.25 an inch. So that same tree costs $125 for 3 years. That's $41 a year. And it even gets better at the low application rate of 2.5 mils per inch. That will cost, a 20-inch tree will cost $100 to treat, or $33 a year. So tree benefits alone can justify the cost of treatment, not to mention the deferred costs of the removal and the replacement. Now, I'm not saying that I'm willing to move to that low application rate yet, but it may be a tool that we can use. Let's say that we treat a tree at a high application rate the first time. Maybe we can follow that up with a low application rate and then move to the medium. I think that we'll experiment a little bit with that and see what we feel is the best for our purpose. Now, I wanted to talk about inspections on private property because our ordinance did allow us to address EAB on private property, and I find that that's a critical component of managing it at the city level. But we did have to follow certain guidelines. We use the guidelines that the League of Minnesota Cities puts out for inspecting on private property as interpreted by our city attorney's office, which essentially says that we need to have reasonable cause as seen from the right-of-way before we can enter a property. So basically, from the road, if we saw a suspicious tree on private property, we could enter to look at it, and either confirm it or not confirm it. From that vantage point, we could look for other suspicious trees. If we saw them, we could follow up and inspect them. But at some point, if we didn't see any other suspicious trees on that property, we would leave. And then it would have to wait till the following year before we would enter that property again. We have to confirm an infestation on private property trees. We're not marking woodpeck trees on private property. And confirmation is either finding an exit hole or a gallery. And I can tell you that at least 95% of our positive confirmations come through bark cracks in the tree. So underneath the bark cracks are galleries. The larvae have mined out enough cambium that the bark dries out, it splits open, and you can see the cracks underneath the barks just plain as day. However, you do need good tools to do that. We use 10 by 50 binoculars. Even an 8 by 50 binocular doesn't quite get you as close as you need to. So I highly recommend buying high quality 10 by 50 binoculars, and you can see it almost as if you're looking through a microscope. And then the other thing we did on private property is we left door hangers. Door hangers were a really good way to communicate information about treatment options, about encouraging private landowners to manage EAB on their own so that we didn't have to get involved with it. So it was slow at first, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this later, but when you're looking early on in an infestation from the right-of-way, it's pretty hard to see suspicious trees from the right-of-way. It didn't take long for signs to start showing up. And when trees were marked on private property, and as you can see in this picture, there were a lot of trees marked in this property. By ordinance, the owner had 20 days to remove the marked trees, or since we did allow treatment of marked trees, they could provide documentation in the form of an estimate that the tree was going to be treated, and that would have to be within the same 20-day time frame. Failure to remove the trees, if they didn't provide treatment documentation, would result in the city moving in and managing the removals. That, of course, took us some time, and it provided an additional 10-day grace period generally for homeowners. It's well understood that if they remove their trees before our contractor shows up, that there will be no charges to that property. But then we also learned that we needed to create a policy for properties that had more than 75 diameter inches of trees. As you can see in this picture, because of the excessive burden, financial burden that it creates for the landowner. So that policy allows for additional time to remove the marked trees. Basically, we gave them a deadline of March 1st to get all the trees removed. And that gave us enough time. So if they didn't do it, we would have time to manage the removals. If they chose a treatment option, we put the burden on their certified arborist making the determination if the marked tree was in a condition that could be treated. Our staff did not spend time on that. We only confirmed the tree and then moved on. And then, as I mentioned, the homeowner needed to provide documentation in the form of an estimate from a licensed tree care company that the trees were going to get treated. And then they had until June 30th to remove the tree, or to treat the tree, I'm sorry. We would follow up after July 1 to make sure that they were treated. And if not, the tree would get marked for removal, and then we would remove the tree after October 1st following that summer, just in order to keep the tree where it was and not move it around during the flight season. And then all treated trees had to be tagged with or must be tagged with an 1¼ inch aluminum inventory tag with the year of treatment on it. That way we can easily tell if the treatment is still valid, and if it isn't, we would check with the homeowner to see what their plans were, or mark the tree and then force them to consider treating it again. And I would like to mention that the city only recognizes emamectin benzoate for treatments. This was simply to avoid problems associated with the neonicotinoid family of chemicals, which there are effective chemicals for treatment of EAB. Now I want to go into a little bit of how our tree mortality increased over time. And you'll notice by this graph, I've got public and private tree removals. In 2015, we really only removed 54 trees. It was largely preemptive. We got some grant money from the DNR to do some work. In 2016, then that number escalated on public land to 376, and we began seeing some on private property, 52 to be exact. 2017, public removals didn't really move much, 385, but private started escalating significantly. We had 800 in 2017. 2018, the public trees spiked a little. We had almost 700 trees on public land and an additional 1,100 on private land. And then in 2019, we went backwards on public land to 430 trees. And you'll notice that we removed 0 on private property, and I'll explain why shortly. But I just want to speak about 2018 and why the spike on public removals, because that increased almost nearly twofold from 2017. That was the first year that we really aggressively started hitting our natural areas, and it added to the higher number. And that followed some inventory work that we did. So we didn't really have a good handle on how many trees we had within that 100-foot buffer of our 100-foot buffer of developed parcels in all of our natural areas along bike paths, parklands, and abutting private property. So we made an effort to inventory ash trees within 100 feet of those developed parcels, and then started removing them. 2019, you'll notice that the public numbers dropped again significantly and kind of evened out with where they were prior to 2018. And the only thing that I can come up with there, and it's consistent with what the MDA suggests might happen, is we had a very cold winter in 2018-19. We had minus 30 degrees for at least a couple days. And at that time, the Minnesota Department of Ag suggested that we could see as much as 40% of the larvae killed from the cold weather. There is no silver bullet. Cold weather is not going to stop it, but it can certainly affect populations. And I think that's what we see there in the drop of public removals. Now you'll notice the trend on private property. So it's very hard to detect from the right-of-ways early on. So 2015, we had nothing. But then the numbers quickly increased once you had reasonable cause to enter private property. And then all of a sudden in 2019, we had none. And that was because in April of 2019, City Council directed staff to halt all inspections for EAB on private property. So you'll notice in 2018 and 19, that winter, we had 1,100 removals on private property. And of course, it really created a public outcry to our council members. People were upset that they were being forced to remove trees. But then exacerbating the problem was the fact that we were trying to abide by the best management practice of doing all of our work during the non-flight season. Well, this resulted in letters being sent out over the winter holidays. And while we did halt our inspections between December 22nd and January 3rd, just to be respectful of people being home for the holidays, we did not stop sending letters. We had a huge backlog of letters trying to keep up with the trees that were being marked by staff. So in retrospect, maybe we should have halted sending letters during that time period, but it's also, we need to consider that managing that volume of removals is challenging in and of itself, and trying to get all that work done and the wood processed by April 15th before the flight season, beginning May 1, was a challenge. Of course, with that directive, it meant we had to revise our ordinance. But we did leave an option for marking private ash trees that are infested with EAB if they constitute a threat to the general public. Also, our ordinance regulates for dead standing trees, so it was well articulated to council that halting private property inspections for EAB is only deferring the inevitable, and that ultimately we will have to come in after the fact and manage the dead standing trees. And then I put the EAB death curve next to the tree removals there, just for reference. Here's a map representation of the distribution of public trees that were marked for removal over a 3-year period. And I really want to point out the distribution patterns and how it kind of moves from south to north generally, and from southwest to southeast. North is the top of these maps. So in 2016, the southwest quadrant was heavily infested, and that's where the first tree was identified, just outside of city limits, and you could really tell based on where we were confirming finds that it was moving from that corner of town. In 2017, you can see it, although we marked trees in the southeast quadrant, you can see there's a greater distribution moving into the southeast quadrant. And then in 2018, you can see how heavy the southeast quadrant is, if you can see my cursor here. But then it also moved into the north quadrants rather significantly. I'm sorry I don't have a 2019 map. With everything that's going on here, it's been very difficult to work on anything but COVID-19, it seems like. But what was interesting to note, and I wanted to mention, is that when we found new infestations in areas where we hadn't seen it before, almost without fail, we would find a homeowner that had a pile of wood and who had almost exclusively heated their house with wood. That was definitely a pattern that we recognized. And then here's a map of private property trees that we marked in 2018. And what I wanted to show, part of the reason I put this map on here is if I toggle back to the last slide, I'll see if this works. If you look at 2018 on public lands, we've pretty much, the worst of it in the southwest is done. But now you can see there's this lag between when you can start seeing it and confirming trees on private property. So in 2018, we just had this massive swell of confirmed trees in the southwest quadrant. And then the other thing I want to talk about on this slide is just the total cost of tree removals conducted by city hired contractors, and then those costs were assessed to property owners, and the sharp increase from 2017 to 2018, due to the large volume of trees that we were marking on private property. We also had an assessment payback period, which we had to revisit. Originally, if the tree removal cost was $1,000 or less, the homeowner had 1 year to pay for it. And if it was $1,000 or more, they had 3 years to pay for it. But we ended up having to make some changes and add a third assessment payback policy to allow a 7-year payback option on assessments that were over $5,000, simply because of the burden it was putting on people. And next, I kind of want to look at how staff time increased over the years. I had mentioned earlier that we wrote in the addition of 3 staff right into our management plan. So when that got adopted, we assumed that we would get all 3 of those positions. To date, we've gotten 2. But just kind of looking through this graph, in 2015, I'd say the majority of that time was spent on inspections, a few preemptive removals, but very little private property inspections and other tree removal work. No injections were taking place. 2016, the numbers went up to about 1,200 hours. Again, mostly inspections, but this year is when we began our injections, injected 450 trees. 2017, staff time increased to 3,600 hours. This is because we had to begin enlisting staff to do more work beyond just the inspections and the injections. And then 2018, we were at over 4,000 hours, basically justifying the 2 positions that we had been awarded. Inspections were very time consuming. This was the final year that we did inspections on private property. It took a crew of 4, 2 full months to complete our citywide inspections. And then in 2019, our numbers are down to just over 3,300 hours. I believe largely due to halting our private property inspections. And then also we continue to do more work in-house. We're doing about half of our removals now each year, along with our inspections and our injections. This is a look at how our expenses have risen over this time frame. So in 2015, we had $23,000 that we had spent on EAB. That increased to $63,000 in 2016. And in 17, it went up to $172,000. 2018, it was $266,000. And then this past year, we spent $436,000 on EAB. So to date, we've spent $962,000. And I should note that these numbers include both our CIP expenses as well as our operational dollars, which include wages and benefits. Next, I kind of want to talk about some unforeseen challenges. And first and foremost, I need to talk about the cap in budgets that has been imposed on us. So our CIP budget cuts, which is what I've represented in this graph. This is the money that I have to work with to contract EAB work, purchase chemicals and equipment to do that work. It doesn't include staff time. It's really contractual money, and then buying chemicals and equipment. So in 2019, our budget request was $350,000. We had just learned that we were going to be capped at $275,000 for the next 3-year time frame. So that was a challenge, and that's what resulted in us having to continually do more and more work relating to our EAB management efforts. In 2020, we were going to ask for $495,000, but with COVID-19 showing up, basically all CIP expenditures have been halted for the year. To date, we've spent about $174,500, and we can spend no more money this year. So fortunately, all of our tree removal work is done. The inspection process is over. And all we really have left to do is inject trees. We've got all the chemical we need for this year to inject trees. But in 2021, we're going to have some significant repercussions of this budget reduction. As per our management plan, we were going to need $650,000, and we've been capped at $150,000 for next year. So I'm prepared for doing the bulk of our EAB management in-house. We're anticipating 700 removals are going to have to get done this winter. The bulk of those will be done in-house. Some of the other unforeseen challenges, a 500% increase in disposal fees. Now, unfortunately, here in Rochester, all tree disposal sites are privately managed. And while the city does subsidize one of them by leasing land to them, all this does is entitle us to bring all of our wood waste there and to be open for the public for their wood waste needs. We cannot control the pricing. So mid-summer of 2019 is when everything hit the fan and pricing jumped 500%. We were previously budgeting $9,000 annually for wood disposal fees. That jumped this year to $45,000, and we're holding our breath to see what happens in the future. From 2015 to 2018, we'd been adhering to the best management practice, and we'd been managing all of the wood waste during the non-flight season. The landfill was agreeing and had all of the debris ground by April 15th was kind of the deadline that we wanted all of the material ground into chips with the flight season beginning on March 1st. But in 2019, they fell behind and they weren't able to get it ground by that deadline. And we knew that there was going to be a problem. Then we had a tornado, which added to the debris problem. And ultimately now they've resorted to burning material, which was never a goal of ours. And I'll talk about how we're trying to pull some of that debris out of the wood stream here, or how we're trying to pull some wood out of the debris stream, shortly. We have noticed another challenge is that some trees don't seem to be responding to the treatments, and it isn't a lot of them, but there's definitely a few out there that seem to continue their downward spiral. We've never treated trees greater than a 30% decline, and yet they're not responding. And I believe that what we're seeing is that treatments performed late in the summer sometimes are not as effective. And so we're continuing to monitor and to try to figure out what's behind that. But that's my best guess at this time. And then, of course, halting private property inspections is a challenge. And I will talk a little bit more about that. Next, I wanted to talk about how we're going to address the budget shortfalls. First of all, if you're not familiar with a Missouri gravel bed system, I would highly recommend that you look that up. It's an excellent way to reduce costs of replacement trees because it allows you to store bare root trees throughout the summer and plant them really anytime you want. But we found that keeping them in the gravel for the summer and pulling them out in the fall is the best way, which I've got some pictures to show here shortly. The root growth is phenomenal when you do that. We can inject more trees. Injecting trees is the cheapest way to manage EAB, in my opinion. You forego the tree removal and replacement costs, and you preserve tree benefits at the same time. And so that will, that will definitely be part of our discussions moving forward, is treating more trees. Involving staff with more EAB work, I think I've talked enough about that. But this comes with a price to the essential services that we normally provide. So increasing treatments, we may be looking at treating 2,000 trees this year if we're only going to be allowed to spend $150,000 next year. And then stopping private property inspections, while this will save us much time in terms of staff time, it does come with a significant cost to our management efforts because homeowners are not managing EAB. I believe it'll result in increased pest pressure on all ash trees, public and private. It'll lead to more dead standing trees, increases in property damage from the brittle trees that break apart and fall over, as well as driving up removal costs for homeowners. It also diminishes the potential to save trees by treatments because now you've waited too long to be able to implement that as a strategy. Of course, we could stop replacing trees. In my mind, this isn't an option, but I fear that decision makers are going to look at this as the low-hanging fruit and an easy one to let go of. I will push for more injections before I push for stopping our replacement program. And here's a Missouri gravel bed. We're looking at one that I was actually responsible for constructing up in Fargo, North Dakota. In fact, this one is below grade. We did that. We made it out of concrete so that gravel beds have to have a solid base, in my opinion, because if you're going to take the trees out, you're going to need equipment. As you can see in my upcoming slides, that'll become evident why you need equipment. But then you also need to remove the rock each year, clean the gravel bed out, and be able to drive equipment in and out of it when you're filling and removing trees from the gravel bed. Here's a look at what happens when you put a bare root tree. This is how they go in on the left, and then the middle and the right pictures is how they come out. And that's generally after one summer in a gravel bed. It is unbelievable the amount of root growth, fine root hairs that develop on tree root systems in a gravel bed system. I guess one last thing about gravel beds, now you're shipping to pay the bare root trees. You're not shipping to pay the soil for the soil of a B&B tree or a potted tree. You can get way more trees on a truckload or a trailer load. And so your costs are just significantly lower across the board. And then finally, I want to talk about our wood utilization efforts. This is a sign that we created and we're using to promote projects that we do using ash lumber. So just indicating that this wood was salvaged from ash trees in our city, and it's being used to make a variety of things. But it all starts by turning logs into boards. And this is the process of milling the logs. Fortunately, we have a strong private wood milling industry here in southeast Minnesota. So these portable mills are readily available, and they'll come right to our site where we've stored the logs. We have the advantage of selecting the best saw logs before any removals are performed. So we take the biggest and the nicest logs and we turn it into just a fine product. Here's a look at some of the lumber. In this last milling project, we produced over 6,000 board feet of lumber. Now, we've done 2 projects like this, and some of the things that we're using this wood for is this. We have a goal to build an enclosure around all the porta potties and dumpsters in our park system. There's about 100 sites throughout the system, and this is the first one that we built. The frame is made out of treated lumber, but all of the fence panel wood, that's all ash wood, and then it was treated with outdoor wood preservative. Here's a look at how we've used it in the interior. This is a new clubhouse that we built at one of the city-owned golf courses, and the bar is finished in tongue and grooved ash wood. There is an added expense to prepare the wood, to plane it, to kiln dry it, and to tongue and groove to use for this purpose. And I'm not prepared to comment a lot on the cost of that because that was done by somebody else. But just realize that there are additional costs if you choose to do that. One of the most unique projects that we were able to supply ash wood for was for the making of bats. I don't have a picture of it, but we have a local historic baseball team, and they make their own baseballs, and they have old-fashioned gloves, and they turn their own bats. So I was contacted a few years ago to see if I could provide wood for them, and finally we did. On the second milling project, we milled some 4x4 cants for them, and they were very pleased. They need to be free of knots, and which these were. And so I look forward to watching a baseball game where a bat is being used that was made from our wood. This is a parklet that was built in our downtown business district. Essentially, they asked for permission to close 2 parking stalls. And then this was a private business partnership that found somebody, one of our tree removal contractors who had wood, who had milled it, kiln dried it for them. And then they built this outdoor park. It's for anybody to use. It's not the business exclusive use. It's for anyone to use. But this is during the construction of the parklet. And then this is the finished parklet after all of the wood was had a preservative put on it. And then this is my final example of a unique project that was done. This was done by the University of Minnesota Extension Forester, and they milled ash wood and built this covered bike rack out of the ash wood. Again, I believe it's treated lumber that make the frame of the building. But here's an outside look at it. So you might notice the green roof up there as well, but this is a covered bike rack. And that is pretty much the end of my discussion. I'd be happy to entertain any questions if anyone has them.
All right, thanks, Jeff. So we'll open it up to questions anyone may have. If you have any questions, type them into the questions box in your GoToWebinar toolbox. Right off the bat, we got one that came early in the presentation. What type of injection system do you use for the chemical applications?
So we invested in the Q-Connect system, which is Rainbow's system for injecting. We chose that system simply because it didn't require the use of plugs. You basically drill a hole, you insert the infusers into the hole, you provide the correct number of infusers based on the diameter of the tree, and then there's a canister that's pumped up to pressure. I believe it's about 80 pounds of pressure, if I'm not mistaken. And then when that's released, it gets forced up into the tree.
All right. Next question. What temperatures or weather conditions have worked best for injections? I found uptake to be slow on overcast days.
Yeah, we actually have had fairly good luck on rainy days. Windy, dry days are by far the worst. Overcast days can impact the uptake, but to me, it's more related to the amount of humidity in the air. But like I said, when it's raining, it's amazing. It seems like that's the fastest uptake that we've experienced.
All right. Next question. Is there a maximum number of times you can inject a tree?
Well, that's a good question that I'm not sure that I have the answer for. And maybe I would defer to you, Erik. That I am aware of, no. I have not read anything that suggests that there is a limited number of injections that can occur.
Yeah, and I can chime in on that as well. That is a good question. Yeah, Jeff is correct in that there isn't a maximum amount of injections that you can do for a tree. And especially whenever you're doing injections with a Q-Connect or one of our plugless injection systems, you minimize the amount of kind of wounding that's happening on the tree. One of the things that we're finding is some of the longer term treated trees that have been treated with plugs over time is people are running out of injection sites. But by doing stuff with a plugless injection system, it's a smaller hole that's coming in, and then additionally allows the tree to compartmentalize at a faster rate. And so you'll be able to theoretically do injections throughout the life of the tree.
All right. And next question. Have you had any problems with bark damage after injections?
We have in very isolated cases, and I can think of one or two trees where we had bark slough on a side of the tree, and we concluded that perhaps when we released the chemical that the pressure was too high. That was the only conclusion that we could base as to why that happened. I can't say that I can confirm that for sure, but like I said, it's happened only once or twice that I'm aware of.
And that goes now well into the next question. What PSI do you usually inject at?
Yeah, so I should have double checked that. From my memory, I believe that it's 85 PSI. Can you confirm that, Erik? Otherwise, I'll have to look that up and get back with somebody on that.
Yeah, so it's usually about kind of a little bit lower than that, about kind of 45 to 65, you're going to get pretty good uptake with. Usually, if you're going at about 65 PSI, you should see pretty good uptake. But it's mainly using the tree's natural vascular system to take it up. That's kind of what we're working with. We don't go like super high pressure to just force it in there. It's using the tree's natural ability to take up kind of nutrients and water.
All right, and next question. Let's see here. Any concern about treated trees in your waste or food stream, especially on public projects?
I do not personally have very much concern about that. I have read some information that there's very little residual chemical in the leaves that fall from the trees that are injected. So no, that isn't something that I've spent a lot of time worrying about. I guess the idea is that those trees are going to be around for a while and hopefully not being chipped into wood chips or making their way, into the debris stream.
Okay, next question. Do you know what percentage of private trees in your city homeowners are injecting?
No, I don't. I know that we have had, it kind of varies, certainly some of the people where we've marked trees have chose a treatment option. And certainly that's something that we promote anytime that we give talks about emerald ash borer, and we encourage treatment on private property. And I know a lot of homeowners have taken it upon themselves to do that based on that guidance. But we've also had neighborhoods join together and develop treatment plans for their neighborhood. And we allow people to treat city trees if they want to pay for it. And so in this particular neighborhood, they got together, pooled their resources, treated both private and public trees in their neighborhood successfully. And then we always tell them that when those trees that they're treating on public land make it onto our list for treatment, that we'll take over the treatments for them. And of course, we can never guarantee that the trees won't be removed for if they're structurally compromised or for other reasons, storm damage. So they're well aware of that. But as far as a percentage of private trees, I cannot come up with that number.
All right, and let's see, looks like we have time for one more question. Can you describe movement of EAB directionally? You made it sound like there's a reason the infestation moved from southwest to southeast and then north. Is this true, and why do you think that?
Well, I was mostly trying to point out how that distribution went from the area where the first tree was found and then spread throughout our town. I mean, some of it is limited to what you can confirm or what you can see as woodpecked as well. But I think what I was trying to show in those maps is that you can predict, for instance, when we had additional treatments that we could find where we wanted to use the treatments, we could use those maps and say, well, based on how this year's removals are distributed, I think this would be a good area to concentrate our treatments. And so we actually, as much as anything, I think the distribution maps, I just wanted to show that you can kind of predict how it's moving. I'm not going to say it's exact, and then you can use that to help direct your management decisions.
All right, thanks, Jeff. If any of you have any other questions that come up, feel free to reach out either to us at info@treecarescience.com or Jeff, and we'll let Erik wrap this up then for today.
Thank you, Erik.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. All right, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. So what I just wanted to do is kind of summarize some of the treatment options that are available for you. And essentially it boils down to there are 3 products that you can use to successfully prevent EAB in your trees. The first one is Transect. It's a 70% dinotefuran product. This is great for trees that are under 25 inches DBH and also for kind of low to moderate EAB pressure, and is really great for remote areas. This is applied as a soil application or as a systemic bark spray. So you can have quick and fast treatments with this. Zytect is an imidacloprid product. This is also great for trees that are under that 25 inches DBH, under similar EAB pressure. With this, you have a little bit more specific time frames when these can be applied, and you might expect a little bit more dieback than emamectin benzoate, which I'll be talking about next, but it was a really effective tool and one of the first tools that was available for doing treatments with EAB. And I'll kind of break down some of the pros and cons of these, but it's a really cost-effective option as well. Mectinite is 4% emamectin benzoate, and that is what Jeff was talking about using for whenever they're treating with the city trees. They're using that 4% emamectin benzoate. And Mectinite is great for trees really of any size, and also for EAB pressure from moderate to high. Compared to these 2 other treatment options, you have at least a 2-year residual associated with it. And this will also control some round-headed native borers as well. And to get down to some of the rates, this is what it kind of boils down to. If you're using Zytect, which is a imidacloprid 2F, for trees smaller than 15 inches DBH, you'll use a 6 mil per DBH inch rate. If it's greater than 15 inches, you're going to go ahead and use double that rate to 12 milliliters per DBH inch. And we also have Zytect in water-soluble packets. It's 75% AI, and the rates for that, the low rate is 1 packet will treat 24 inches DBH in smaller trees than 15 inches. And if you're treating larger than 15 inches, you'll go ahead and double that rate, so 1 packet per 12 inches. And the last one for the, talking about the Dynatefron, which is our Transtect. For soil application, 1 water-soluble packet was going to treat 5 DBH inches. And if you're going to do a bark spray, what you would do is you'd mix 6 of those water-soluble packets in 1 gallon, and this can be applied. You generally can get about 60 to 85 inches, DBH inches that you can treat with 1 gallon of ready-to-use solution. And if you have any questions about this or want any additional information, please feel free to reach out to us. More than happy to provide that over to you. And the last one is Mectinite. As I had indicated before, it's a 4% emamectin benzoate. And what's great with it is you can use a wide variety of rates. There's been some work showing at, Jeff had alluded to, where you can treat at that low rate and get protection. But also you'll have situations, you know, if you have a perfectly healthy tree right next to a completely infested tree that's only shown about 30% canopy left, it might be good to go at a higher rate. But what's great with Mectinite is it allows for you to have kind of control over the rates that you want to be using whenever you're applying it. And this just breaks down the actual treatment window. Whenever you're applying with Zytect, you want to be targeting either early spring or late fall. You don't want to be putting that down in the summer time frame. And the reason for that is because imidacloprid takes a little bit to be fully taken up into the canopy. And you really want to have peak amounts of insecticide in the xylem of the tree when the eggs start hatching and the larvae start to feed. And that is kind of that July to October time frame when you're going to be doing that. Transtect is a great option to be able to still hit that summer time frame. So you find an infested tree, but it's around June, and it's going to be too late to put Zytect down. So Transtect could be a great option to be able to treat that tree, but you do not want to be applying that in the fall. And the reason for that is because the active ingredient, it moves up into the tree a lot faster, but it doesn't have as long of a residual. So if you apply it in the fall, you're not going to be getting protection when you need to be getting that peak amount of insecticide in that xylem for that next year. And lastly, the one that I usually suggest to people, and especially within a municipal setting, is using Mectinite, because that can really be applied anytime you have 3/4 of the leaf development and right up until you have leaf drop happening. It's a great option for treatment, and additionally with it you get 2 years of guaranteed protection, but a lot of municipalities have been moving over to a 3-year cycle to kind of help with some of the budgetary constraints when trying to manage this pest. But for additional EAB management support materials, feel free to check out any of these links to see our diagnostic guide. And we will also be creating an Emerald Ash Borer Municipal management guide. This will be available. We're almost done with it. Within the next couple of weeks, we'll reach out to you to let you know that it's available. And additionally with this, we have EAB cell sheets that are available. So feel free to contact us. And the cell sheets just provide additional information to homeowners to kind of describe what Emerald Ash Borer is. But feel free to reach out to us directly, or your territory manager or an arborologist for more additional information. And just wanted to highlight that if you need any sort of technical support for any of these products that I mentioned, or if you just have general questions about Emerald Ash Borer, feel free to reach out to we have a specific technical support line for any sort of product questions or equipment troubleshooting and field support. As Jeff had indicated, with using the Q Connect to accomplish some of these injections, if you ever have any questions about it, or if you're in the field and something's not working, feel free to give us a call. We can help you out. You can reach us via phone, text, email, or live chat. So there's 4 different options to get out to us. And the last one, just want to say that the ISA CEU self-reporting, you'll receive an email with all of this information and the documents that are needed for self-reporting. So once you receive the email, go to the ISA's homepage, go into isa-arbor.com. You'll then go to My ISA and then click on My Dashboard and follow the instructions provided in there and attach the certificate of attendance and copy of the email, which contains the abstract for this. And if you have any questions about that, feel free to reach out to us as well. But with that, just wanted to thank everyone for attending this today. Thank you, Jeff, for agreeing to be a presenter for this. This is really great information to share out. This webinar has been recorded, and we'll go ahead and send this out to you at the conclusion of this as well. But if you have any questions for myself, feel free to reach out to me at any point in time, or reach out to Rainbow. Otherwise, with that, thank you everyone for your time, and thank you, Jeff, for your presentation today.